Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. Listen for the word of the living God as we read these words. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware, no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of birth pains." The living God still speaks today. Thanks be to God. We are easily distracted by human achievement and the stoking of our insecurities. We marvel at the pyramids of Egypt and Mexico, skyscrapers in Charlotte, New York, or Mumbai, the Great Wall of China. We're discomfited with uncertainty, with something new, unexpected, with experiences that take us unawares. We jump into fight or flight mode all too quickly when we are not certain what we are seeing or when something shocks our sense of security. It can be hard to remain focused on what God calls us to amid the distractions. How do we look past these distractions to focus on what really matters? 5 years ago, I was looking at Matthew's version of today's passage with a church that was about to be closing its doors as it merged with another congregation. There was a lot of emotional turmoil going on, as you might imagine. Parishioners looked to the history of their ministry in that place, at events that had been held there over the years, consequential life events that took place in that space, family ties that were wrapped up within those walls, in the specific pews that they sat on, just like you do, right? There was a lot to process as they were facing the reality that their time in that place had come or was coming to an end. It was a reality they could have seen coming. In fact, when I first arrived, I was asked by some of them if I had been appointed specifically to shut down that church. They had been clinging to their identity and traditions that were tied up in those bricks and mortar, though they knew it just could not last much longer. Jesus' disciples had no such foresight. They were looking at the enormity, of the stones used in the construction of the temple. They were marveling at the strength and power required not only to set them in place, but also the strength and power which made it seem that they would be indestructible. How could you possibly knock down something so big, heavy? This was a construction designed to last millennia. It was no brick facade on a wood frame structure with limited durability. The walls and foundation were of quarried limestone shaped into 2.5-ton blocks. You can be sure I'm not moving one of those next week. Limestone may not be the strongest of stones, but blocks of limestone that are big are very impressive, especially when arranged into a temple edifice. They're not going to be knocked over in a storm, washed away in a flood. Herod's temple was built to stay. It was built to last. It was built to be a great and permanent monument to his name for generations and generations yet to come. Disciples were amazed by Jesus' words. They were excited to share their wonder with Jesus over the temple, its enormity, everything that went into its construction. This temple was built to last, and it obviously would remain a center of Yahweh's worship for generations to come. Like a kid with a cool rock in hand, they wanted to share their wonder and amazement with Jesus. Jesus burst their bubble of excitement completely, however. Instead of sharing their awe over the majesty, the majestic nature of the temple, he redirected their attention elsewhere. He told them that as impressive as this construction was, it would all be torn down and laid to waste. You can be sure that did not sit very well. Not only was Jesus not sharing their sense of marvel and amazement, he was calling them out for focusing on what he deemed unimportant, unimpressive. Regrouping on the Mount of Olives, some of the disciples brought Jesus' comments back up in hopes of fleshing out that response and making some kind of sense out of it. They tied the destruction of this magnificent temple with concerns about, quote, the end of the age and signs that were to signal its arrival. That may seem like a jump to us, but they had no conception that Jerusalem and its temple could be destroyed without a cataclysmic end to the world. End of the world as they knew it. Speculation regarding the, quote, end times was borrowed from many images and ideas that they had encountered in Babylon with Babylonian Zoroastrianism. Its concepts of a huge battle at the end of the world as the gods of good and evil squared off for some conclusive battle. Jesus' response does not quite fit into the range of these expectations. Rather than confirming the numerous signs of the times, so-called, that were already prevalent in the apocalyptic literature and tradition circulating around these disciples, Jesus tells them that these signs have absolutely no significance. None. Somehow we seem to skip over the very first thing he says along these lines. Beware that no one leads you astray. It would seem that we are rather averse to being wary, aren't we? If there is any issue that people like to get all tangled up in, this would seem to be it. Rather than being wary lest someone lead us astray, we seem to rush right into speculation over the very thing Jesus told us not to worry about. While I was teaching at the seminary in Brazil, a local church asked me to teach a course on Revelation. What they really wanted wasn't a study of John's book of Revelation. What they wanted was a study of all the pop theology about the end times. They wanted me to predict when this and that was going to happen. I warned them that they were not going to like what I taught them. But we embarked anyway on this study. And instead of discussing predictions of the end of the world, we spent the time dealing with what John was trying to communicate through his apocalyptic imagery. His message is really simple. Essentially, it was, hang on, for if you are faithful, you will receive the victory that Jesus has already won. There's nothing to fear. Despite what all the enemies arrayed against you look like, there is nothing to fear. Christ has already won. John's message in Revelation is similar to Jesus' message to the disciples here. Don't fret over speculation about the future, the end of the world, the end of the age, or the time of God's final reign on earth. None of that matters. Many will come along to lead you in all sorts of wrong directions. But there is no sign at all they can point to that has any significance. Any significance whatsoever. It's all bunk. It's empty speculation. As many times as I have read these words, and as many times as I have told people not to worry about the failed projections arising generation after generation after generation, I'm ever confronted with one more bogus speculation over things Jesus told us very clearly have no meaning and no attachment to reality. We're just suckers for fortune tellers, it seems. Especially for anyone pretending to speak with some kind of religious authority. We'd rather spend our energy on empty speculation than with actually putting God's love into practice throughout our lives and relationships. Instead of accepting Jesus' words that these reported signs have no meaning, we want to latch on to the image of birth pangs in this passage as pointing to the imminence of a promise to be fulfilled just after these things Jesus said refer to absolutely nothing. If they refer to nothing, they refer to nothing. If they refer to nothing having no significance, they are not harbingers of anything to come. They're just things that are bound to happen over and over, all around the world as a matter of course because of who we are and what this world God created is like. Either they occur as the result of the human condition or the nature of God's creation. Jesus has taught us very clearly about who God is. Jesus has proclaimed on more than one occasion and in more than one way that love is central to all of God's will and purpose. Jesus has affirmed that earthly political power, prominence, and definitions of greatness have absolutely no place at all in God's reign. Jesus has taught that victory does not come through force, through violence. It comes through love, grace, justice, humility, and service. Meanwhile, the angst of those clamoring for the coming of the, quote, end times are focused on concerns of power, force, war, battle, and victory through intimidation and brute strength. All of that is distraction. All of it. Such are not the things of God. They are not the things of God's reign. Those concerns do not simply waste our time. They derail us from the path set before us. Like Elijah up in the cave on the mountain in 1 Kings chapter 19. We need to discern better where to look for God's leading, God's presence, God's voice. God's reign is neither human power structures, nor great accomplishments, nor the concerns of fear-mongering. God's reign is not engaged in those things, nor is it tied to them in any way whatsoever. The focus of God's reign is the work of love. We have the work of love to do. The rest is distraction. The rest derails us from love. Can we focus on what does matter instead? How many times does Jesus really need to tell us? Love your neighbor. Is it really that hard?